It appears we are now live. Me, 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 me.
Me too, and you.
Me too. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Saturday night special. We are sitting here getting ready to go over Chernobyl, actually. I had to give it a name. I'm Rob, your host, as always, host of the Xtreme Movie Show. Guesting in tonight, as always, is the Doctor. Good evening,
How's,
Doctor.
how's it going?
It's going. It's going. So, this is something different that we're trying out. Chernobyl. TV show from Amazon, 4 episodes in out of 5. What do you know about Chernobyl?
I didn't first find out until about a couple of years ago. Like, what was it? Had been in 2006. It was all the news. They were talking about. Well, it's obviously for people who don't know what it is. It takes place in Ukraine. And back in 1986, it was a nuclear disaster.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reactors blew up from poor design, and just not really diligent people working there. No, they cut corners. So anyway, there is that time. I was only 1 year old, but from what I've read on the internet and articles and stuff, I've read views. This could have wiped out all of Europe from the radiation cloud.
Yeah, so it made me think. I'd heard some word of mouth about it. I don't have HBO myself, so a friend of mine was telling me about it and said, "Hey, man, you really got to check this out." And I was like, there's always something somebody likes, and so you just have to, I think, sometimes filter what you want to see. And for me, I clearly remember Chernobyl. I'm a little older than you, obviously, but I actually lived through that time period. And 1986 was a crazy, crazy year. I was in high school at the time. I was actually in my math class of all classes when the shuttle blew up. That was
Oh yeah, Challenger. Forgot about that.
it was very, very powerful what was going on at that time. And then a couple months later was Chernobyl. Yeah, so I just wanted to get on. I have watched a few of the episodes. I think it's a fantastic show. I've really been enjoying it. I want to talk about the first 2 with you. I know you've seen them as well. So let's go ahead and just start about natural disasters, because we cannot talk about this without talking about real life stuff. For you, what's the biggest natural disaster or like news event that you've experienced?
Oh, in my years being alive,
Yeah, that you just felt
well,
as it happened.
9/11. I was
That's a
just
good one.
I was just getting out of high school. A couple of years later, 2 years later.
So where were you at the time of when it
When
happened?
I was in like what was it, U.S. history class, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. I guess it was like 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I remember whenever it happened, but early. I remember early in the morning. We are sitting there, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, turn the TV on." So I'm like, they're watching, and all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, okay." And then they're like, they cut it up because they didn't want us to watch it.
Hmm.
Somebody in my class actually had a relative that was in New York at the time, so but he didn't know what was going on until I got home, and I'm awesome. Like, I turned on the news, and like they're like, at first a plane flew in there. Like, they thought it was an accident. So
Right.
and then you find out that it actually was a second plane hit. So it's like I can only imagine the panic. You know, we ever had anything like that happen on U.S. soil before. The closest thing we had was Pearl Harbor.
Right.
That was Hawaii, and unless you were there, it didn't really bother you. As much as it would.
I think it's interesting you talk about you were in school at the time because for a good chunk of my professional career, I was actually an educator. I taught science, physics, actually, believe it or not. So I remember I had a class at the time at a small school. I only had about 10 students in this one class, and I'm going over something on the whiteboard, and I'm looking at my students. I'm like, "Hey guys, come on, what's going on? What's up?" And they're all looking glum or whatever. And sometimes teenagers are teenagers. I remember this one girl. She goes, Mister Rob, you don't know what's happening, do you? I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And she goes, oh, some plane hit a building. I said, really? And so I actually, turned on my computer or whatever and saw it. And then announcement came on board about what was going on around the whole school. And it was like I was reliving the shuttle all over again. So to me, I was like, geez, I've been through this. I mean, it was awful, but Challenger was just as spooky. And so when I think of Chernobyl, I think of how big it is. Having been through a couple of those experiences, if you've experienced anything like that, the shuttle. My parents, of course, experienced several of them, of course, with JFK and whatnot. And then, of course, some other things along the way. It's just terrifying what you feel in the show. If you don't have that, I think it's hard for you to appreciate how good this show is.
See, the thing is, we kind of, it was different though for Chernobyl. The government kind of basically lied to them, tell them not to worry about it. They were ill-equipped. They've never had anything like this before. It's the first time anything like this has ever happened. I mean, obviously, I'm not toning down 9/11 where the plane crashed to a building, but they, you couldn't see the disaster. You could see a disaster. Most people were like, if you watch the first episode, they're on the railroad tracks. They're like, oh, look at this. It looks kind of cool. It's it's beautiful. The one person said to the other guy, the one lady, and I'm thinking like, if you've what I've read and know about this nuclear disaster and stuff, I know radiation. That's the first thing that hits you, and it can be carried by wind. This is the particles.
I think the whole. At first, I really didn't know how to take the show. Like, I didn't know if it was supposed to be like a drama, a thriller, a political type thing. I didn't know if it was going to be a little SJW, which there's very little of it in there. As I finished the second episode, I was like, man, I'm pumped up. I want to talk about this. I know we were trying to coordinate a time today to do that. So I went to look up some information about it, and surprise, surprise, Stephen King came out basically saying, oh, you can't think of this without thinking about Trump. And even, I guess, the writer, director, somebody prominently involved with Chernobyl basically said, yeah, this is supposed to be, kind of like, a slap in the face against Trump or whatever, or I agree with you, Stephen King sort of thing. And my first thought was, okay, Stephen King's older than I am, but this person's probably not as old as I am. And I'm going, are you effing kidding me? This is about the most pro-American, or really, I won't even say pro-American. I'll see more anti-communism type movie that I've seen probably ever. It's just from the get-go when you see, well, first of all, in the first episode, the girl's pregnant,
Yes.
throwing up. So you're like, oh, is something going on? You can tell it's a flashback from the lead scientist who hangs himself there at the beginning. But I got to tell you, as soon as she was walking and talking, and you see first of all, the crappy building she's in, but as soon as you see the window, and in the back, very far off, you see that flash of light.
Oh, yeah.
And then a few seconds later, the whole building rumbles. That hooked me right then and there.
Oh, right there, exactly. That's like, how often do you see that? And it's the whole visual of the fact that what they're in. You really don't see scenes like that, and if you do, it's maybe from like a movie, and it's like but this one's based on a true story.
Yes.
So it sort of really reels you in. It's like, oh man, and you're watching the series. If you don't know anything about what's Chernobyl, you're anticipating, well, is this person gonna die from? How far it is there? And then so you figure like, oh, they're fine. No one, as long as you don't go near the radiation, you'll be fine.
Yeah, but nobody knew anything. They weren't told. Yeah, and then so of course when the accident happens, you start realizing, okay, there's two things that are going on here that both are very scary. One is just how horrible of a system of governing that communism is, and that's on full display. That's like its own kind of quiet war that's going on, because it forces the people to act and say things in certain ways, because that's just how it is. You understand how Russians drove themselves to drinking, but then also too, you just have, like, to your point, nobody really knows what's going on. Just think it's an accident. They don't know what's up, and then are trying to figure it out. And there's some horrific scenes that they play, which I don't know that they cheese it up or ham it up, but I think very realistic about what humans would do in that situation.
Look at that one guy. That one guy on episode 2. He when the physicist Emily Watts' character, Ilana Komyuk, I probably pronounced it really bad, but she was a physicist, and she was in Moscow, or no, was she in Moscow?
Minsk.
And she said, well, she came to him and this guy and told him he was gonna evacuate her. And he's like, oh, you're basically a woman. You don't know what you're talking about. Basically, his attitude was towards her. And she's like, well, you came from a shoe factory. You're a dumbass.
Yeah, and to me, I thought she was the only SJW type reference in there, because I don't know if that was legit or not. I certainly had no problems with the later performance, but she seemed extremely professional about it, which was
exactly. Good. But yeah, so I mean, if this is a slap to Trump's face, I really don't see it, and I could care less.
It's just, everybody in today's media wants to jab at Trump, but I mean, kind of going back to the commie thing, of course, it goes up the chain a little bit. They have their meeting in the local town because it was just probably a mile or two away from the actual site is where most of the people lived. I had played a game way back in the day called Stalker, and it was based off of this, and it was kind of a neat setting. And then I was like, oh, this is based off of Chernobyl. Didn't realize it. And
Hmm.
so it's just kind of haunting, but it was interesting seeing how the person says, okay, what's going on? And the two people that know hands on what's going to happen from the ground level are telling their superior, and their superior is kind of in denial, but he's also trying to not react emotionally, but he also knows he cannot have the blame put on himself. So immediately concocts this story, or
Oh
basically
yeah.
something that he has to say. And I got to tell you, outside from education, I spent my entire adult life in the manufacturing business in some very, very big,
Yeah. The trick.
I
So
don't want
basically,
to say the companies, but I've been in some very big war companies. Let's say I worked for some war machines. So to see all that, I'm like, oh my goodness, it just was
well,
so realistic.
the trickle down effect was horrible. It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna take the blame, so I blame this guy, even though this guy was innocent. Well, and then they're like, well, I'm not gonna go kill myself. You go do it. Go check go look inside the radiator. Top of the tower. Stick your head in there. And the guy's like, no.
I had studied physics for a bit at a university here, and was working on that back in my college days. And I worked for a couple different professors on some side jobs. One professor I knew particularly well was specialty was, and I'm trying to watch what I say and be generic here, of course, trying to stay in character. But this particular professor was he specialized in energy and how it affected biosystems, life and living flesh, that sort of thing. And so he was somebody I worked with on one of my senior labs, which I was always interested in. I'm kind of geeking out here a little bit, nerding out, but the history of science and how the thinking that goes behind it. So if anybody's ever heard of, like, say, James Burke, the day the universe changed and connection, some older stuff, British, I immediately thought of that because there's a scene in here where they're talking about, well, what's the blah, blah, blah of the blah, blah, blah to the average person? You just don't know. And I thought this is where the writing really stood out in the show, where they threw the number 3.6 Roentgens at you constantly.
Yeah.
So you go, okay. But then what was even better about it was that later on it's explained to you, like, say in episode
Yeah.
2, that two things. One, it's the rate at which you're getting energy as opposed to the total amount that's been released, which the scientist, the lead guy that's narrating the story, spazzes out about with his new superior that he meets in Moscow. And I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. They're letting you know what's important. They're letting you know what it is, and now you're seeing how it affects their decision making. And then when you're watching them interact with each other, absolutely incredible. Absolutely, just love that whole part to it. You really just have to watch this show. I mean, it's that good.
I mean, I like the one. Yeah, you brought up that the 3.6 whatever meters, whatever it is,
The
or
rent,
radiation.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the unit.
and yeah, and then you find out later, like, well, they're using crappy technology. It's going actually going past it. They're maxed out. And the guy's like, oh no, they're just faulty. Let's get a different one in there. You're not
But
reading
that's
it
the whole
right.
thing about communism. When the state takes over the production of everything and says, "Okay,
Oh,
you worked in a shoe factory or whatever that guy worked. Now you're this." You just yes to the state, and so yes, they're going to distribute all their equipment, and everyone's going to have crappy stuff because there's no real production going on. That's why with your Russian history, you had lots of people.
you, I just felt
Yeah, get
horrible for these
whacked.
people. The
Yeah.
one guy, the one doctor, he's like, oh, I'll pour milk on his face. That'll help with the burns.
Well, it's also a little bit about how once they get to power, they automatically know better than everybody else just because they were made those, made the leaders of the country. That I don't know. Yeah,
You don't know what's best for Russia. Russia knows what's best for you.
yeah, yeah. And they're turning down people who are legitimate scientists because it's in the end, it's going to make Russia look bad, and we can't have that happen. Therefore, you don't know what you're talking about because you have to think about it politically, not scientifically. And that's what's going on, especially with the guy who, yes, I was a shoe salesman, and now I'm in charge. Yeah, and for some reason, politics are going to save Russia. But it was. I just started watching to talk about this tonight. We're 13 minutes away from the end of episode 2, and right away, and I don't know if you guys already talked about this, but what got me was the first thing they didn't think about was save the people. It was, how are we not going to look bad?
How, yeah, exactly. And
Yep.
how are we going to shut the town down? And I don't have an issue with the way they had a military type of and thinking about it. Well, we're going to surround the town. We're going to get X amount of troops. We're going to contain. I mean, so they have their protocols. They're not stupid, but it's just that their particular system and method for what they believe in politically was on display on like you, to your point, on how the bigger ups handled it. But not only that, I thought, okay, are we going to see people that are super Russian, hate Americans, this and that? And you know what? If this was going on and you didn't even think about communism, the people in the town were just acting like what normal people would be like, except for when they had to make a tough decision because they knew the influence of communism was, seeping into their decision making. Everybody else would go sit on the rails and watch the fancy looking fire as the ionized radiation, because it was late at night, early in the morning that this is going on. People would be curious, so they acted like normal human beings. That was the beauty of it. Oh man,
Episode 2 really gripped you when they had the guy in the tank or the truck. He wanted to go get an actual reading from the actual right next to the base, and they're like, "Well," the guy's like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll put lead on there." He's like, "Well, no, you can put lead on, you'll still die." So the one general stepped up and he actually said, "You know what? I'm going to volunteer then. I don't want my men to die." I thought that was pretty cool. I'm not sure if that's what really happened, because like I said, Holly likes to spin things, but I mean. There are people even in Russia. I don't doubt it that they have honor, they have respect for their fellow comrades. They'll put their lives on the line.
yes, it was very humanistic. It was very touching to see, because there were not a lot of pretty people in this movie. They seemed like everyday normal Joes. I think it was filmed in Britain, if I'm correct. So I think a lot of the drone shots and everything they had in there captured it very well, and it looked faithfully recreated from what I've seen. I thought though that I didn't know how to take this movie at first, but once I said, you know what, this is a horror movie. You could call it sci-fi horror if you want. If you look at it as a horror movie, it's done, and it's done well, because the score is fantastic. And let's just talk about the special effects. Radiation poisoning is disgusting on the way it burns you up literally from the inside out. And so there's the one scene where I just kind of went, oh, when I freaked out, where the guy gets really, really close to a radioactive door, and immediately you're watching like his hip and all that, and the blood stain just starts coming out. You're like, oh my God, that's disgusting.
Okay, so I'm reading now. They actually filmed it in Lithuania.
Okay.
And they filmed it was in the production was moved to Visjanias, Lithuania, and then they shot both the exterior and interior of the Ignalina nuclear power plant, which is a decommissioned nuclear power station that is sometimes referred to as a Chernobyl's sister, due to its visual resemblance.
Yeah, probably the same type of model. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I read that they're still in Russia. They still have the same graphite design, the faulty design in their other nuclear power plants. So.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, again, politics, is a big part of this show. But in terms of scientific ability, there's reasons why hammers cost $500. I'm not necessarily defending that, but I understand, having, like I said, worked for a few big war machines, understand the protocols that are in place. But when you have very little money, have very little financing, and you're trying to be the world's strongest economy back then in the 80s, when you're in the middle of what you think is a war with America and everybody else trying to be the top dog, and of course nobody being able to produce a lot, you can see where they skimp and cut corners. Eventually your quality is going to suffer, and that's what happened here. But I like how the female scientist explained to everybody what was going on with the water and the superheating effect. Also, it allowed you, just as an observer, if you don't know anything science-wise, what was really going on. Yes, we can hear you.
Wow. So, yeah, Gail's kind of looking at the after effects of Chernobyl, and she said that there was worldwide 150,000 abortions due to fear from what could come from Chernobyl.
Well, everybody who's listening and will be here shortly, we have another guest tonight as well on the Saturday night special, and that's Englentine from his over 18, almost 18.5 now subscriber channel of I Love Comics. Man, I think it's growing faster than we down here in Florida. Good evening, sir.
Howdy, howdy.
So we were just talking a little bit about Chernobyl. I believe you obviously got the message about it.
Yep.
What we had said, I think, right before you popped in, was that we were just looking at the first 2 episodes for now. I just heard about it through word of mouth and gave it a shot and just thought it was fantastic. But we started off. I had asked the doctor about what he had actually been through in terms of worldwide type of phenomenon. And of course, he had mentioned 9/11, like we've all experienced. But you and I were old enough. I
Yeah.
know I remember Chernobyl, so I was going to ask you, what do you remember about it at the time?
Not much. And I was having that conversation with Gail where we were like, wow, we really didn't pay attention because I mean, yeah, we're 16, at the time. So, we're teenagers into our own lives, not really paying attention. We did, of course, hear about the horrible nuclear Holocaust that was going on over in Russia and how bad it was. And we got to shut down all the plants around the country and everything. And I remember the hysteria from it more than the specifics from it. And
Yeah, because I was saying 86 was a really popped year in that, because actually you were not local at the time, but almost local. I think you had another month or two before you came in because January of that year was the Challenger.
yeah,
Yeah, and then a couple months later was this, and of course it didn't hit everything instantaneously like it can now with Twitter and the internet and conspiracy sites and whatnot too. So yeah, we obviously didn't pay as much attention because it's friggin' Russia, who cares? Damn commies. I mean, but the whole Russia United States thing was huge, and I just can't explain that to people that didn't live at the time just how big that was. So, what did you think about the first 2 episodes in general?
well, like I said, I'm 13 minutes away from the ending of the second one. So far, so good. I think it's very well acted. They definitely cast it proper. It did, of course, frustrate me because what we know now, hindsight being 2020, and of course, communism being communism, got to protect the state before you protect the people. It just you're listening to politicians over scientists about a scientific problem. And I think it's a really good show. Like you said, it is kind of filmed like a horror film. It really is, and I think that works for it. What gets me is I do also like the fact that they got the suicide out of the way. I do like the fact that they got that they told you flat out, this is the ending. This is where we're leading to now. This is how it all happened, because you're not anticipating anything. You already know this is a story that we've been through, so let's watch the horrors of it unfold. And I think that was a wise decision on their part. Just as far as structurally, as far as the movie's concerned.
They definitely hook you at the beginning with the suicide, and to your point, get rid of it. And then, of course, you're watching it. From what I understand, I'm looking at it going, well, it definitely has a very 80s feel. And supposedly the production design is what really started getting a lot of people interested in it, because they're like, no, the person was able to get some, I don't know, tech specs, and we're able to almost recreate that entire control room almost button for button, because it does look 80-ish. You had a lot more bigger things and everything too. The equipment wasn't nearly as digitized as it is today, especially in the scientific lab. So the fact that these guys were doing all that, I'm like, yeah, it kind of feels like the 80s, I guess. I can believe that watching it. But then too, like I had mentioned, you may have heard this, but the music was outstanding. It really does a great job of just having that sense of dread. And they didn't have to overdo the violence, but tons of vomiting, tons of sickness, tons of medical people saying, get the iodine, and everybody's starting to slowly realize, this isn't like a giant wave we're going to go surfing or something stupid and ignore it, or like here in Florida where we go, it's a level 1 hurricane. You really don't have to pay attention to it because nobody wants to hear that doesn't live in Florida. But man, just the fact that the one scene guy, I think it was in episode 1, they're standing there watching the fire, and then all the radioactive ash starts falling down on them, and they're like, oh, it's almost like it's snow, and they've got the baby and they've got the dogs, and you're like, yeah, you guys are effed. I mean, it's just, and then the bird that fell down right at the end.
That was good.
I was like, oh Jesus, this is a hook that made me want to watch the second episode right off. And then in the second one,
it also,
at the end of that,
before the bird, of course, they watch the kids going to school. So it's a way of telling us that they just killed a whole bunch of kids without doing the shock moment of us seeing a whole bunch of dead kids. I think if you'd actually showed the dead kids, it would take us out of the moment. Like it would almost be exploitive. So
Yes.
I really do appreciate the way they did that, because the bird really, like, they follow the kids in, they go over, there's the bird, it's dying. Those kids are dead. And you get that, and that's where it stops. Like I said, it stays horror and stops being exploitation.
Yeah. Doctor, you were saying something about how you liked how, I think it was the end of episode 2. Did you want to mention that? I thought that was pretty good too. Doctor. Is there a doctor in the house?
Did he jump out?
He's been getting dropped, I've noticed a couple times that we've
I'm
done
still
this.
here.
All right, Doctor.
I had myself on mute because you guys were talking for like good 10 minutes there.
Well, he scared the crap out of me too, because he just hopped on in the middle of talking, and I
I saw him.
my God.
My question for you guys, before we get to the end of episode 2, compared to how much coverage there was for 9/11 back in 1986, this was kind of held quiet until a few days later, until Sweden broke the news. Was it really covered it much on the news as much as 9/11, or do you guys remember?
I remember as a kid, there was a 3 Mile Island incident. Not quite the same thing, if I recall correctly, but I was a child, and it didn't seem to be much in the general consciousness of the public. In the 70s, though, you could argue about that's when, as a kid, you're like, what's the stupid Indian crying in this commercial? What is it with waste? And there's all this fear mongering about climate change and pollution and how we're going to die and all this stupid stuff.
The world was going to freeze in the 70s. You remember that?
Oh yeah, that was
And I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to be inflammatory when I say this. I'm really trying to bite my tongue a lot with some of these things. I don't believe in climate change. Period. I'm just going to say it. So I don't mean to be offensive to anybody. I mentioned earlier to those that were listening, I studied physics for quite some time. I'm not a physicist by trade or by profession, but I end up taking a different path. But
when you say that, no, you're talking man-made climate change, or as they say, right? Obviously,
the political thing of climate change, which really picked up in the 70s when we had a really, really bad economy, which you can argue later in another stream why we had that. But the point is that's when the hysteria of environmental science and eco-terrorism really became a thing. So when 3 Mile Island became public, it was a total freak out. Everything's going to melt. You're going to have three-eyed fish. Everyone's going to die. Nobody's going to have babies. Well, it's true.
Yeah.
And
we were told every 10 years that in 10 years the world's going to end.
Yes.
Look at the 50s. Flash. Hide under your desk. Gets a nuclear attack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, so to answer your question about that, yeah, you hear about it. Of course, you only heard what was available at the time, because what I think was pretty accurate about the show so far was that they tried to control as much as they could. But when you're dealing with that high level radiation, you had these other countries hundreds if not thousands of miles away that were picking up energy readings. And my understanding is that there was a bunch of different countries that were doing whatever energy type experiments, or at least ones that involve that type of equipment, where they could go, hey, wait a minute, these readings are weird. This could only be the case if something like this happened. And then when a couple people conferred, scientists, just groups in general, they realized, holy crap, this has to be it. So it was basically, to the show's good credit, seems to be realistic. I have not read how realistic it is, but I thought that was a fantastic touch.
They haven't covered it much in the first 2 episodes, but according to the Wikipedia, well, I'm assuming take it with a grain of salt because everything you hear, read is true. But they're saying that the fire produced a considerable updraft for about 9 days before it finally became contained in May 4th, 1986.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's 9 days of contamination, and and you think we would have noticed the birds falling out of the sky?
Yes. That was the thing. Well, they did just the one, and they were dramatic about it. But what about the ending of the second episode? You'd mentioned that earlier as one scene that stuck out.
For being horror movies, and you didn't need a monster in there. The fact you're crawling through a dank, really small, was it a sewage or is it a water treatment? They're trying to get to the pumps.
Water.
Drain them. Yeah. So they're all in these giant hazmat suits, breathing with the gas mask on, armed with flashlights. 3 guys. They know with it going this close to the radiation, they're gonna die within a week. So they're going in there. It's dark as it is. You see water and you hear noises. It's scary as it is, and then you're claustrophobic too. On top of that, and first the one guy's flashlight goes out, then the second guy's they start panicking, and then the third, and then you just hear the radiation just something's like crackling, because their suits, they had the Geiger meters, I think they're on their chests.
The Geiger counters.
Geiger counters, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But
wow, you're the fact that he didn't know how to say that, and I'm not putting you down, is a big difference between the way you were raised and we were raised.
Well, yeah, I didn't fight about any of that stuff.
Yeah, we're not even the worst of it because they're our parents, as the song says, under the desk in the air raid drills.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we weren't even the worst of it.
And then your father was a nom, so every now and then we'd be like, hey man, let's go down to the pizza store and get some Sprites and some pizza and play some video games. And then your dad would just make some random comment about the way he would hold his gun upright, so that way if he had to make it level, it would be more efficient at shooting. You're like, I don't know what triggered that, no pun intended, but he wasn't, insane or anything. It just something made him think about it, and he would share it, and we're like, crap, the kind of stuff that these guys went through, because I've not served. I know that you haven't either, but our parents did. So every now and then you'd get something. You're like,
wait, were you guys playing duck hunt and he came down and told you to raise your gun up a little more?
No. His father, being in Vietnam, would say things to make you realize it. Because like my father,
something would remind him.
The theater, something would remind him. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine what that must be like there, though.
Those people I would say they had stress. It's, and they really don't want to talk about it. But yeah, something would trigger it, and they'd vent. Because who can you talk to unless you talk to another vet? We really don't want to talk to about your family and scare them.
Well, I will say that the scene you're talking about, I thought was good, and I don't know how episode 3 and 4 are going to go, and then I guess the 5th one's getting ready to come out this weekend. But basically, the guy that doesn't want to believe the science, but kind of knows he's right, but has to deal with the political stuff. I think that's the Skarsgård guy. They're there in a town and they're working with the 20 people, and the guy says, "Hey, look, you come into our town, all this is going on, you don't listen to us. Why should we listen to you?" And basically it's well, you need to, because it's the right thing to do. So who's going to volunteer to go down there? Because they kind of know that they're going to be dead. They just want to be treated like adult males and be told that, so they can do what's right for the family, what they think is best, and have maybe some meaning in their life. So these 3 guys volunteer to go down into where the water's at, and that's the scene you're talking about, where they're putting on the suits and they're trying to have as much protection. And the guy's basically saying, yeah, you're probably going to die, but here's some Geiger counters. This is what you got to do. So you hear it going and it's building up, and you're like, yeah, I've seen flashlights go out 50 million times ever since watching the Hardy Boys in the 70s or even earlier. And it's nothing new. But there's the combination of the way they do it, the way it's shot, the build-up, the humanistic part to it, where nobody's yelling or screaming necessarily. They're like adults, and they take it seriously, and it comes across as you're watching it. So at the end, when the clicking of the Geiger counters just goes insane and all that too, and all the lights go out because of all the radiation, you're like, holy crap! And then it goes blank, and they just let you hear them for a minute. It was fantastic.
You don't need the radiation.
To that. You guys are like absolutely spoiling episode 1 and 2 for me, but like I said, we're 13 minutes 56 seconds away from the ending of that and seeing that. But
you don't even need the radiation or the Geiger counter making noise. Just the fact that they're going into our dark space like there. You walk in the water, and then your flashlight goes out. You get lost, disoriented.
Yeah. And the panic was setting in. You could tell with them, the way they were breathing and everything, and it's understandable. And you didn't know if they were even going to. I had questioned whether or not they actually were successful in what they were supposed to be doing, because you don't, I think, directly see it. So I don't know if that's a plot device. I don't know if that's a thing or not, or what. But it was telling, because when they come out, they get a round of applause, and the 2 people don't want to go near them because they know they're super radioactive.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much, we're starting to get into episode 3. So let's just kind of wind down here a little bit. I know you said you had a few minutes left there. Doctor, just in general, what do you think going forward about it?
I think it's going to be a really good show. I mean, if you guys watch the Hot Zone at all, it's kind of the same thing they're even doing this year. First, they're with the Hot Zone, doing the Ebola, and they're all in the hazmat suits, and these guys, they built the fear up. If you're in a situation, you feel like you're in a situation when you watch this stuff, and it just blows your mind. It's like, can you imagine just being in this situation? I couldn't. I would hyperventilate. there's no way I could be in a suit like that, and take small breaths and go somewhere and do something like that.
Oh
Yeah,
man, yeah. I agree
it's
with you.
and then you get a tear in your suit, whether you're doing the Ebola or you're for just the radiation from the Chernobyl. That's like, oh no thanks. I mean, these guys are brave.
Yeah,
They knew they're gonna die, but they just like World War II. Though these people went to war, they knew they're gonna die, but they thought about what they're dying for, who they're gonna protect. If they're successful.
yeah. And as I said earlier too, I was like, it's a very anti-communism kind of show, so that really, it's like, I know Stephen King came out, and I think the writer even said, "Oh, you're pretty smart to have seen that about this being like a slap against Trump." And I'm like, Trump back in the '80s was, snort coke, doing deals, doing whatever he was, and he was actually a liberal Democrat at that time, or at least a Democrat, and which he had to do to be business. And I mean, we were aware of Trump back then too, because
Yep.
it was cool. He was one of those figures that you looked up to in the sense of, hey, here's a guy that's successful, and he was one of many celebrities that all of a sudden, because of how the boom that you had in the '80s economically, that people said, hey, I don't necessarily want to be like Trump, but I want to be successful like him. And so in a way, there was a certain element of positivity to it, and as a kid, you didn't quite get everything that was going on, but he wasn't the pariah that maybe some people consider him today.
It's funny. I actually had the Playboy with Trump on it. I got it
Yeah.
sealed up somewhere.
Yeah.
It's gonna be worth something sometime.
And I tell you, I don't consider myself a gambler, but I've traveled the world and I've gambled in a few casinos. I've won the most money in Trump's Taj Mahal up there in Jersey. So I'm just saying, thank you, Trump. What about you, E? Any final thoughts on what you've seen so far about Chernobyl?
As far as Chernobyl, I'm still in on it. I'm still watching it. It's a good TV show. It's gripping, and it's kind of funny that they put the Westworld trailer at the beginning of the last episode of Game of Thrones. This is what they should be pushing. This is really good. I like this so far.
Yeah, Eric says there, John remembers Trump from the USFL. Do you remember $3 versus $1, Eric? Anyway, that's a little inside joke on the USFL, because that was some of the first games that I saw down here in Central Florida, just a few miles away from the Pine Hills Palace, but it was just a Saturday night special, so we have to come up with a theme for this. All right, I don't have anything else there for you guys. I appreciate y'all hosting tonight. We had 6 guys watching Chernobyl. Fantastic show, a couple episodes in. There's going to be a part 2 on this, probably by next week, where we're going to go over the last couple episodes. It's, in my opinion, a horror movie. It's very anti-communism, but no matter what your politics or what your liking is, it's just damn good entertainment. So I would dare say it's extreme. So with that, you guys, have a good night.
Thank you very, very much for watching.
So, guys.